They didn't scream. They didn't cry. They didn't even hesitate. They erased me. My name is Lena Carter, and 15 years ago, when I was 13 years old, my own parents decided I was disposable. Not dramatic, disposable. Not go stay with a relative for a while, disposable. I mean garbage bags on the porch, disposable. But here's the part that still messes with people's heads. 15 years later, those same parents showed up smiling, confident, with a lawyer at their side. Convinced they were about to inherit millions from the man who saved my life. They thought the story was about to reward them. They were wrong. Before I tell you how their faces fell apart in a glass conference room 47 floors above Seattle, I need to take you back to the summer that broke me and quietly rebuilt me. Because nothing about what happened later makes sense unless you understand what it feels like to grow up knowing you were never the favorite. Never the priority. Never the child worth investing in. I grew up in a small, tired house in southeast Portland. The kind where the walls were thin, and the tension was thick enough to choke on. My father, Mark Carter, worked as a mechanic at a downtown garage. He barely spoke unless spoken to, and even then, his opinions magically lined up with my mother's. My mother, Elaine Carter, ran our house the same way she ran her checkout lane, at the grocery store, fast, sharp, and with zero patience for mistakes. She always knew who deserved what. And then there was my sister, Brianna, 2 years older, blonde, blue-eyed, loud in all the right ways. The kind of kid teachers adored and strangers complimented without prompting. She looks just like you did at that age. People would tell my mom. And Elaine would glow. I didn't look like either of them. I had dark hair, dark eyes, and a quiet personality that never seemed to land right in our house. I looked like my dad's late mother. Something my mom never said was bad. She just never said anything at all. The imbalance showed up everywhere. When Brianna turned 15, my mom threw her a full-blown party. 15 guests, a 3-tier cake from a fancy bakery, a karaoke machine rental, streamers, photos, applause. When I turned 13 3 months later, it was the 4 of us sitting at the kitchen table with a discount cake from the store where my mom worked. The frosting said happy birthday. No name, because it was leftover from a canceled order. I told myself it didn't matter. Kids are good at lying to themselves, but when I was 12, I accidentally discovered something that snapped everything into focus. Brianna had a college savings account. Opened when she was 5, years of deposits, thousands of dollars. I asked my mom why I didn't have one. She looked genuinely surprised. Brianna needs money for college, she said. You'll figure something out. You're adaptable. That was the moment I understood my role. I wasn't the future. I was the backup plan. The summer of 2010 was when everything cracked wide open. In April, I applied, quietly, to a competitive STEM summer program at Oregon State University. 6 weeks, residential, full scholarship, total value just over $4,000. I didn't tell anyone. Hope was dangerous in that house. When the acceptance letter came in May, my hands shook opening it. Out of over 2,000 applicants, 50 students were chosen. I was one of them. For one afternoon. Just one. I felt like I mattered. Then Brianna mentioned a performing arts camp in California. 3 weeks. No scholarship. Expensive. Something my mom instantly latched onto like it was destiny. That night at dinner, Elaine announced her decision like it was grocery math. Lena, you'll decline that science thing. We can't afford both. Brianna's camp will help her college applications. She said it casually. Like she wasn't crushing me. I stared at my plate, and then something happened that changed my life forever. I said, no. The room went dead quiet. Even the fridge stopped humming. Excuse me, my mom said, her voice dropping into that dangerous, icy register. The scholarship is mine? I said. My voice shook, but it didn't break. I earned it. She stared at me like I'd grown teeth. If you can't sacrifice for this family, she said slowly, then you're not part of this family. At 13, I thought she was bluffing. She wasn't. 3 days later, I came home from the public library and found everything I owned stuffed into 2 black garbage bags on the front porch. Elaine stood in the doorway, arms crossed. I called my brother, she said. He'll pick you up. From now on, you're his problem. I stood there frozen. My dad was in the hallway behind her, he wouldn't look at me. Upstairs, Brianna watched from behind her bedroom curtain, then disappeared. I sat on that porch from 6 p.m. until 10 p.m. No porch light, no food, no goodbye, just me and the bags. When my uncle's old Honda finally pulled into the driveway, I didn't know that while I waited in the dark, my mother had been inside signing papers that would erase me forever. I was just a scared kid who thought she'd done something unforgivable. And I had no idea that 15 years later, that document would come back to destroy the very people who signed it. The car smelled like old coffee, motor oil, and rain-soaked asphalt. That's the first thing I remember when Uncle Ray's Honda pulled away from my parents' house. I was curled up in the passenger seat, knees hugged to my chest, my entire life reduced to 2 trash bags in the back. No goodbye. No explanation, no rearview glance, just the sound of tires hitting the wet road and the quietest question I'd ever asked. Did I do something wrong? Uncle Ray didn't answer right away. He kept his eyes on the highway, knuckles tight on the steering wheel. Then, without looking at me, he said something that still lives in my bones. No, kid. You survived something wrong. That was the first time an adult didn't blame me. We drove north through the darkness, Portland shrinking behind us. I watched streetlights smear into yellow streaks against the window, and tried not to cry. I didn't want to look weak. I'd already learned that weakness was expensive. Uncle Ray lived in Ballard, a quiet Seattle neighborhood with narrow streets and houses that leaned like they'd seen too much rain. His place wasn't big. 2 bedrooms, creaky floors, mismatched furniture. But the second we stepped inside, something shifted. He handed me a towel. Showers hot. Beds made. No lectures. No conditions. No. We'll see how this goes. Just space. That night, lying in a bed that was actually mine, I cried into a pillow until my chest hurt. Not because I missed my parents, but because for the first time, I felt safe enough to feel anything at all. I didn't know it then, but my mother had signed away her rights to me before Uncle Ray ever arrived. A neat stack of papers, a notary stamp, a clean break. While I waited on that porch, I was already legally gone. Uncle Ray never told me. He didn't need to. What he did instead was something far more radical. He showed up. Every day. He woke me up for school. Helped me with homework. Let me eat cereal for dinner when neither of us felt like cooking. When I flinched at raised voices on TV, he noticed. When I apologized for existing, he corrected me gently every time. Stop that, he'd say. You don't apologize for taking up space. Uncle Ray wasn't rich. Yet. He owned a small property management business he'd built from scratch, working insane hours, saving every spare dollar. He didn't spoil me. He invested in me. He bought books, paid for tutoring when I struggled. Showed up to every school event like it was the Super Bowl. For the first time in my life, I wasn't invisible. At school, teachers noticed the change fast. I went from quiet, distracted kid to focused, relentless. I buried myself in math and science, not because I wanted to impress anyone, but because numbers made sense. They didn't play favorites. By sophomore year, I was staying after class, joining clubs, entering competitions. Uncle Ray framed every certificate like it was priceless. Proud of you, he'd say. Every time. No conditions attached. Meanwhile, my old life faded into silence. My parents didn't call. Didn't ask how I was doing. Didn't even pretend to care. The first time they reached out wasn't to me. It was to Uncle Ray. They needed money. That's when I learned something important. They hadn't changed. They'd just run out of options. Uncle Ray said no. Not angrily. Not dramatically. Just no. High school flew by. I graduated top of my class. Scholarships followed. College acceptance letters piled up. Uncle Ray cried at my graduation like he'd won the lottery. Whatever happens, he said, hugging me tight. You already beat the odds. College was hard. Brutal, actually. I worked internships, pulled all-nighters, questioned myself constantly. But every time I felt like quitting, I remembered that porch. The trash bags. The waiting. And I kept going. Years passed. Uncle Ray got older, slower, still sharp, still stubborn. When his health declined, I stepped in, not because I owed him, but because love doesn't keep score. When he passed away quietly in his sleep, my world cracked open all over again. And that's when my past came knocking, because grief has a funny way of attracting vultures. The phone call came days later. My mother's voice, unchanged, sharp, confident, slid into my ear like no time had passed at all. "I heard there's a will," she said. No apology, no condolences, just expectation. What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Uncle Ray had planned for this moment. Every paper, every clause, every consequence, and the next time we were all in the same room, the truth was going to be read out loud. The phone buzzed on my desk at 9:17 a.m., unknown number, Portland area code. I stared at it for a full 3 seconds before answering. Long enough for instinct to kick in, long enough to know exactly who it was before she even spoke. Lena, same voice, same tone, like she still owned my name. I closed my office door slowly and leaned against the desk. "Elaine, not Mom. Not anymore." There was a pause. I could hear her recalibrating, adjusting the mask she always wore when things didn't go exactly her way. "I heard about Ray," she said. "I'm sorry for your loss." The words sounded borrowed, practiced, empty. "The memorial was last week," I replied. Another pause? "Oh, well, I was thinking I might come up for the will reading. Family should be there for things like that." There it was, not grief, not regret, inventory. I almost laughed. "How did you hear about the will?" I asked. "I have an attorney," she said quickly. "Chalvin Brooks. He made a few calls." That name rang a bell. For all the wrong reasons. Uncle Ray had mentioned him once years ago. A lawyer he didn't trust. A man who talked fast and promised outcomes he couldn't guarantee. I ended the call politely. Coldly. Then I did something Elaine Carter never expected from the 13-year-old she'd left on a porch. I made my own call. Margaret Linwood, Uncle Ray's estate attorney, confirmed everything the next morning. Elaine and Mark had filed a formal challenge to the will. Their claim? Undue influence. They were accusing me of manipulating a dying man, isolating him, stealing what rightfully belonged to family. The irony almost knocked the air out of me. The woman who abandoned me was now accusing me of abandonment. Margaret was calm, precise. She slid the paperwork across her desk and let me read it myself. Every sentence was carefully worded, legally sharp, emotionally cruel. "They're demanding 50% of the estate," she said, "at minimum." "Do they have a case?" I asked. Margaret hesitated. "They don't need to win," she said. "They just need to stall. Freeze the assets. Force a settlement." I understood immediately. This wasn't about justice. It was about pressure. Uncle Ray's business employed dozens of people. Properties needed management. Tenants needed stability. A drawn-out legal fight could cost millions, even if I won. "They're hoping I'll pay them to go away?" I said. Margaret nodded. "That's the play." Then she asked a question that changed everything. "Do you have any documentation from when you went to live with Ray? Anything official?" I shook my head. I was 13. Margaret didn't look surprised. "Ray wasn't," she said. She stood, walked to a filing cabinet, and pulled out a folder so old the edges were yellowed. She opened it slowly. Then she looked up at me with an expression I'll never forget. "Lena," she said quietly, "did you know your parents legally gave you up?" The room tilted. She slid the document toward me. Voluntary relinquishment of parental rights. Dated July 15, 2010, Elaine Carter, Mark Carter, signatures, notary stamp. They hadn't just thrown me out, they'd erased me on paper. "As far as the law is concerned," Margaret said gently, "they stopped being your parents that day." My hands shook as I read the words again. I remembered the porch, the waiting, the silence. While I sat in the dark, they were inside signing me away. "What does this mean for their claim?" I asked. Margaret's voice sharpened. "It means they have no standing. No legal relationship. No right to challenge anything through you." She leaned back. "And there's more." She explained that Uncle Ray had anticipated this exact scenario. He'd left instructions, evidence, emails, witnesses. He knew they'd come, and he was ready. Margaret laid out 2 options. Option 1, offer a settlement. Quick, quiet, expensive. Option 2, let the will reading proceed. With them in the room, present the documents. Read the truth out loud. Once it was public, there was no going back. I went home that night and sat in the living room staring at photos of Uncle Ray and me. Graduations, birthdays, quiet moments frozen in time. In every picture, he was smiling, he'd known. At sunrise I called Margaret. No settlement, I said. They made this public. Let's finish it. The will reading was scheduled for Friday at 2 p.m. 5 days away. 5 days to prepare. 5 days before the people who threw me away would finally learn what it costs to burn bridges you might need later. I arrived 15 minutes early. That wasn't an accident. It was strategy. Uncle Ray taught me that the most powerful person in the room never rushes. They arrive calm, grounded, ready. The conference room sat on the 47th floor, wrapped in glass. The city of Seattle stretched out below like it was holding its breath. Gray water, low clouds, a sky that matched my mood perfectly. I wore a navy blue suit, simple, clean, no jewelry except a thin silver chain Uncle Ray had given me years ago. My hair was pulled back tight. I didn't want to look intimidating. I wanted to look unshakable. The room filled slowly. Estate representatives, auditors, longtime employees from Ray's company, and a few charity directors he'd supported for decades. People who respected him. People who knew me. People who knew the truth. At 2:03 p.m., the elevator doors opened. And just like that, my past walked in wearing confidence it hadn't earned. Elaine Carter led the group like she owned the place. Black dress, pearls, full makeup. Her grief looked expensive. Behind her came my father Mark, older, heavier, eyes permanently fixed on the floor. My sister, Rachel, no longer the golden child, just tired. And finally their attorney, Calvin Brooks, carrying a briefcase that probably cost more than my first car. Elaine's eyes locked on me. "Oh," she said loudly. "You're already here." I didn't stand. "Elaine." "Not Mom." That single word made her pause. She smiled tightly. "We should talk privately before this starts. Family matters." "The reading begins in 2 minutes," I said. "I'm sure it can wait." Her jaw clenched. Margaret Linwood, the estate attorney, stood. "Mr. and Mrs. Carter, please take seats along the wall. The main table is reserved for beneficiaries and representatives." Elaine froze. She'd expected center stage. Instead, she was being seated on the sidelines. She didn't take it well. As she passed the charity representatives, she stopped, introduced herself, loudly. "I'm Ray's sister-in-law," she said. "We were very close before. Certain people caused problems. I didn't react. I didn't need to." The room was already watching. Rachel leaned toward her. "I don't understand why she's up there and we're not." Calvin Brooks scribbled notes like a man hunting for anything he could twist. Then Elaine said it. The sentence meant to wound. "A child rejected by her parents usually earns it," she said, voice sharp. "A mother always knows." The silence that followed was deafening. Margaret cleared her throat. "We will begin." She broke the seal on the envelope. "This is the last will and testament of Raymond Carter." Elaine leaned forward, smiling. That smile didn't survive Article 5. Margaret's voice was steady as she read. "I make no provision for my sister-in-law Elaine Carter or her husband Mark Carter." Elaine stiffened. "For reasons I wish to be read aloud and entered into the record." The color drained from Mark's face. Margaret continued. "In July of 2010, Elaine and Mark Carter voluntarily relinquished all parental rights to their daughter, Lena Carter, transferring full guardianship to me." Elaine shot to her feet. "That's irrelevant." Margaret didn't look up. "By terminating their parental relationship, they severed any legal claim through Lena. I adopted her in 2012. The word adopted hit the room like a dropped plate. Elaine went white. Mark looked like he might throw up. Rachel stared at me like she'd never seen me before. Calvin Brooks stopped writing. Elaine's voice cracked. "This can't be legal." Margaret slid the certified document across the table. "It is." That was the moment the room turned. Not against me. Against them. I finally spoke. "You didn't lose me," I said calmly. "You gave me away." Elaine opened her mouth. No sound came out. Margaret continued reading. "I leave my entire estate to my daughter, Lena Carter. Not beneficiary. Daughter." Elaine sank back into her chair. The rest of the will barely mattered to them. Charitable donations. Business succession. Scholarships. Their story was already over. When Margaret finished, she looked at me. Would you like to say something? I stood. Family isn't blood, I said. It's who shows up when you have nothing. No yelling. No revenge, just truth. Elaine tried one last time. We can fix this. We're still family. I met her eyes. You ended that 15 years ago. The room stayed silent. The will was closed. And just like that, everything changed. The room emptied fast after the will reading. People shook my hand, spoke softly, told me how proud Uncle Ray would have been, how strong I handled it, how incredible the outcome was. But when the last chair scraped against the floor and the door finally clicked shut, I felt empty. Not victorious. Not relieved. Just quiet. Because closure doesn't arrive with fireworks. It shows up like exhaustion after a long fight. You're standing, but your body doesn't know what to do next. Elaine didn't say goodbye. She stood slowly, like gravity had doubled, and walked out without looking at me. My father followed her, shoulders slumped, smaller than I remembered. Rachel hesitated at the door, turned back once like she wanted to say something, then didn't. That night, I went home alone. I poured a glass of water, sat on the couch, and stared at the wall where Uncle Ray's photo hung. You planned for everything? I whispered. Didn't you? A week later, the first email arrived. Subject please read. It was from Elaine. I didn't open it right away. Old instincts kicked in. Ignore, avoid, survive. But I wasn't 13 anymore. I had control now. So I waited until I was calm. Then I opened it. It was long, rambling, emotional in all the ways that avoided responsibility. She talked about stress, money problems, being overwhelmed, how things got away from her. She said she wasn't asking for money, then immediately talked about working things out. She signed it Love Mom. I read it 3 times. Then I noticed what wasn't there. No apology. No acknowledgement of the porch. No mention of the papers she signed, just regret that things hadn't gone her way. I forwarded the email to my therapist and closed my laptop. 2 days later, I replied. 4 sentences. Elaine, I've forgiven you for myself, not for you. I don't want a relationship. Please don't contact me again. She never responded. For the first time, that silence didn't hurt. 3 weeks passed. Then a letter arrived in the mail. Handwritten. Plain envelope. Portland postmark. From Rachel. I almost didn't open it, but something in the handwriting, uneven, hesitant, made me pause. Inside was a single page, no excuses, no requests. Just truth. She wrote about the night I was thrown out. About watching me from her bedroom window. About seeing me sit there with garbage bags for hours. About how she could have come down. How she didn't. I was scared, she wrote. And selfish. And I let them do it. I've carried that with me every day since. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She didn't ask for money. She just said she was sorry. I cried. Not because it fixed anything, but because it was the first honest thing anyone from that house had ever given me. I didn't respond right away. Healing isn't about speed. It's about consent. Weeks later, after talking it through in therapy, I wrote back. I set boundaries. Clear ones. No messages through our parents. No money talk. Ever. And the right to disappear if it became too much. If she accepted that, we could try something small. Controlled. Safe. Her reply came 3 days later. 1 word. Accepted. We started with a 15-minute video call once a month. That first call was awkward. Polite. Careful. 2 strangers connected by history neither of us fully trusted. But it was real. And real is rare. Meanwhile, life moved forward. The estate settled cleanly. Uncle Ray's business stayed stable. Employees kept their jobs. The charities received their funds. The first STEM scholarship launched in his name. Kids like me, bright and overlooked, finally getting a shot. That part mattered most. Not the money, the meaning. One afternoon, standing in my office overlooking the city, I realized something unexpected. I wasn't angry anymore. Not at Elaine. Not at Mark. Not even at the girl I used to be. I felt free. Because the story I'd been trapped in, the unwanted child, the disposable one, had finally ended. And the story I was writing now, that one belonged to me. 1 year to the day after the will reading, I stood on a cracked sidewalk in Capitol Hill, staring at a bronze plaque bolted into the brick wall of a modest commercial building. The Raymond Carter Building, 1954-2025, a man who chose love over blood. I traced the letters with my fingertips. This was the first property Uncle Ray had ever bought. Back when he was broke, stubborn, and betting on himself. No flash, no headlines. Just work. Now it stood renovated, updated, alive, and somehow so did I. Life hadn't exploded into happiness after the will reading like people imagine. There was no victory montage. No sudden inner peace wrapped in a bow. Instead, there was quiet consistency. The business grew, slow, steady, intentional, new properties, higher occupancy, ethical management, the way Ray had taught me. The scholarship program funded its first group of students. 5 kids. 5 futures redirected. When I met them, nervous and brilliant and unsure of their place in the world, I saw 13-year-old me in every face. That's when it hit me. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was interrupting cycles. Rachel and I still talked once a month. Sometimes it was light. Sometimes uncomfortable. Always honest. She never mentioned our parents unless I asked, which I rarely did. Elaine never contacted me again. And that was the piece I chose. People assume forgiveness means reopening doors. It doesn't. Forgiveness is internal. Boundaries are external. You need both. One afternoon, as I left the office, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. Lena. It's your dad. My chest tightened. But not like it used to. I stared at the screen for a long moment, thought about everything he didn't say when it mattered. Everything he watched and allowed. Then I blocked the number. No reply. No explanation. Just a boundary holding firm. That night, I sat on my balcony watching the city lights flicker on, thinking about something my therapist once told me. You don't owe closure to people who refuse to protect you. I breathed easier after that. Because here's the truth no one tells abandoned kids: you don't heal by proving them wrong. You heal by stopping the argument altogether. Uncle Ray didn't save me with money. He saved me with consistency. He showed me what unconditional support looks like. Not grand gestures, but showing up when it's inconvenient, staying when it's hard, believing when no one else does. I used to think success would feel like revenge. It doesn't. It feels like calm. It feels like standing in your own life without flinching. I still have moments, triggers, random things that send me spiraling. A porch light, a black trash bag, the smell of wet concrete at night. But they don't own me anymore. I own my story. And if you're listening to this and you've ever been made to feel like you were too much or not enough by the people who should have loved you most, hear me clearly. Their failure is not your destiny. Family is not who gave you life. It's who refuses to abandon you when life gets hard. I touched the plaque one last time before leaving. Thank you. I whispered. Not just for the inheritance, but for choosing me when no one else did. There's a strange moment that happens after everything settles. After the fights are over. After the lawyers disappear. After the people who hurt you stop knocking. It's the moment when you realize you're no longer reacting. You're choosing. That realization didn't hit me in a courtroom or a therapist's office. It hit me in a grocery store on a random Tuesday night. I was standing in the cereal aisle, staring at a shelf full of options, when I caught my reflection in the freezer door across from me. No tension in my shoulders, no scanning for threats, no internal apology for taking up space, just me alive, grounded, free. And it made me think about the girl I used to be. The one who believed love had to be earned through silence and compliance. The one who thought survival meant shrinking. I spent the first 13 years of my life chasing conditional love. If I behaved better. If I needed less. If I didn't rock the boat. But unconditional love doesn't ask you to disappear. Uncle Ray taught me that by example. He never asked me to be grateful. Never reminded me of what he'd done for me. Never used support as leverage. That's how I knew it was real. I used to think closure came from confrontation. From forcing people to admit what they did. It doesn't. Closure comes when their opinions lose authority over your life. Elaine never apologized. Mark never explained himself. And somehow, that stopped mattering. Because the truth is this: not everyone who hurts you is capable of understanding the harm they caused. Waiting for them to change keeps you stuck. Letting go lets you move forward. Rachel and I still talk, cautiously, honestly. Some months feel easy, others feel distant, and that's okay. Healing doesn't demand symmetry. I don't know if we'll ever be sisters in the traditional sense. I respect her honesty, and I respect myself enough to move at my own pace. That's growth. The scholarship program expanded. More students, more stories, more proof that pain doesn't have to be the end of the road. Sometimes I read the application essays late at night. Kids writing about being overlooked, forgotten, passed over. And every time, I want to tell them the same thing. You don't need permission to matter. Your worth isn't something other people get to vote on. I used to believe my parents defined me. They don't. They never did. People ask me sometimes if I regret not reconciling with Elaine. I don't, because reconciliation requires accountability. And accountability was never on the table. Forgiveness doesn't mean access. Love doesn't mean obligation, and family doesn't mean entitlement. The most radical thing I ever did wasn't succeeding. It was choosing myself without apology. One night, months after blocking my father's number, I found the old photo box Uncle Ray kept in his closet. Inside were pictures I'd never seen before. Him holding me at 14, awkward smiles, blurry moments I didn't remember being photographed. On the bottom of the box was a folded note. In his handwriting. Lena. If you ever doubt whether you belonged, remember this: they didn't lose you. You outgrew the place they tried to keep you small. I cried reading that. Not from sadness, from release. Because some truths don't break you. They rebuild you. If you had asked 13-year-old me how this story would end, I would have told you it doesn't. I would have said some wounds stay open forever, that abandonment brands you. That being unwanted rewrites you in permanent ink. I was wrong. Here's the truth I learned the long way: your beginning doesn't get to decide your ending. For years, I believed my parents' rejection was proof that something in me was broken. I carried that belief into friendships, into school, into work. I overperformed. Over-apologized. Over-gave. Because when love is conditional, you learn to audition for it. Uncle Ray broke that cycle, not by rescuing me, but by refusing to let me shrink. He gave me what every child deserves: safety without strings. That's why the inheritance was never the point. The real gift was identity. Standing on that porch at 13, I thought I'd been erased. What I didn't understand was that being erased from a place that never valued you is sometimes the beginning of being written into the right one. My parents thought blood guaranteed entitlement. It doesn't. Time doesn't heal all wounds. Boundaries do. And here's the part I want you to hear, especially if this story feels uncomfortably familiar. You are not obligated to reconcile with people who refuse to take responsibility. You are not cruel for protecting your peace. And you are not broken for choosing distance over dysfunction. Forgiveness is internal. Access is optional. I forgave Elaine years ago. Not so she could come back, but so I could move forward. I forgave Mark. Not because he deserved it, but because I deserved freedom from carrying him. And I forgave myself for believing I had to earn love by disappearing. Family is not defined by DNA. Family is defined by who stays. Who shows up when you have nothing to offer. Who doesn't weaponize your vulnerability. Who doesn't turn love into leverage. Uncle Ray chose me, and one day, I learned to choose myself. That choice changed everything. The business thrives. The scholarship grows. The past stays where it belongs, behind me. Rachel and I are something. Maybe not a fairy tale ending. Maybe not what people expect, but it's honest. And honesty is the only foundation worth building on. As for Elaine and Mark, I don't wish them harm. I don't wish them access either, because peace isn't loud. It doesn't argue. It doesn't beg to be understood. Peace simply walks away. If you've ever felt like you were too much, or not enough, in the very place you were supposed to be safe, let me tell you something I wish someone had told me sooner. Their inability to love you properly is not a reflection of your worth. Your story is not over because someone failed you. It's just beginning somewhere better. And if you're watching this right now, still here, still listening, maybe part of you needed to hear this. You are allowed to outgrow people who refuse to grow with you. You are allowed to build a life that doesn't include those who hurt you. And you are allowed to be proud of how far you've come, even if no one from your past is clapping. Thank you for staying with me through this story. If it resonated, if it made you feel seen, then you already understand the lesson Uncle Ray left me with: love that costs your dignity is never love. Always choose yourself.